Hey guys, thanks for stopping by to watch my tutorial. I'm Brittany Knutson from R&R by Design, and today I'm going to show you how to create a light oak wood finish on any surface. That's right, any surface. This is going to be a faux wood finish. It can go on laminate furniture, say it's an IKEA furniture, even if it's metal. Even if, like, say you had a headboard that's a really dark cherry wood like you see a lot of people have, and you really don't want to strip that wood down to do that light oak finish, you can absolutely just do a faux wood finish and make it look very realistic with only using a few products. Now, I decided to do the light oak finish. I actually got the inspiration from Restoration Hardware's light oak. If you want to see some inspiring photos on there to copy the grain pattern and copy the way that they did the wood veneers, I highly suggest that, or Pottery Barn, going online, getting their catalog. There's a ton of photos of furniture for you to replicate and do the design. Now, to do this light oak finish, these are the colors that I chose. The first one is Dearborn. This is a cooler white. Not quite just the Bauhaus buff, but it does have a little bit of a cooler tone that will help us get to that grayish that we want for the light oak. The second one-step color is Java. And this, of course, you've probably seen. This is that beautiful light brown, very natural looking. Java is important because we're going to mix it with the Dearborn to create these two colors right here for the glazes. One being the 1-to-1 ratio, which is a nice beige, and the second one being a very creamy, lighter beige with 1 part Java to 4 parts Dearborn. Now, other than the one-step paint, you're going to need the gel stain in Windsor Gray. This Windsor Gray is not only going to add the gray tones at the end, but we are also going to use it to make the distinct gray dark grain marks that you see on oak, even if it does have that white figure grain. And the last thing, most importantly, is glazed over. This glaze, make sure that you're using the Amy Howard at Home glazed over with the one-step paint. All of these products were made to go together. Same thing with the gel stain and the glazed over. With that being said, the only other product we would need, of course, is water, and let's get started. Now, for the base coat with the Dearborn, we're going to use a synthetic brush, just like you would with any other piece with the one-step paint. It's a water-based paint, so you always want to use a synthetic brush, whether it's nylon, polyester. Always start with a wet brush whenever you're working with water-based paints and synthetic brushes. They clean easier after you're done. There's less chance of the paint to dry out on the brush, and it helps it just move. The velocity of the paint, it helps it just go on so much smoother. And I never work out of the can, and I know a lot of people do, and I know it's kind of one more step that you don't want to do, but pouring it into a new container not only helps with the project, but it also helps the rest of your paint to stay in the right consistency, so you're not having to add water later, because it will dry out fast being a chalk-based paint. You should not need to water down with the new formula. If you have the old formula, I used to add water to water it down just a bit because it was a little on the thick side. And then I just take my brush after I pour and just use it to clean out the rim. It's a little trick. You can put it right back in the can. Just like so. Paint never dip past the halfway point. I know a lot of people also scrape across the edge like this to create or to prevent the paint drips. Don't do that. That's going to create more brush strokes for you because now you only have paint on half your brush. You always want to do it. I'll show you. You dip it in and then you just tap it just like this. Okay? And then we now minimize the dripping. And we have it on both sides, all right? So we always start in the edges. So we're going to add the glaze, and then we're going to use our negative tool to pull the glaze off to create those grain patterns. So to do that, you have a couple of options. One of them being an actual graining comb. You can get these at most specialty stores, any faux finish store, online, probably Amazon. I think I did get these on Amazon. So they're just rubber combs. They're made for graining. Some people use them for glazing when they're doing pottery, stuff like that. So you can use those. They do come in different widths, different types of teeth, make different designs, pull out different amounts of glaze. Or an even easier one is just go to Home Depot or Ace Hardware, and you'll find these in the tile section. And they're actually for tile, but they actually work perfect for the graining for the glaze. So you can actually find these absolutely anywhere. They're much easier to come by and find. And they also have the different teeth to make the different designs. One is steel wool. So this is, the rougher the steel wool or the more coarse it is, so this is a 3, and they go from 3 all the way to 4/0. The bigger the grain pattern will be. So if you do the 4/0 and the smoother steel wool, like we used to smooth it out, that's going to take off a lot of glaze, and you're not going to have a lot left behind. But if you use the more coarser ones when you do it, it's actually going to pull off and make lines just like you would in graining. So that is another option. Eraser, those small white erasers, you can actually use it for the actual grain pattern. If you take a X-Acto knife and you cut little slits inside to kind of take chunks out, you can actually create the grain pattern and use that to drag and pull away the glaze in the certain pattern. Now that our board is ready, now we're going to tape it off. And just so you know, you could do, let's just pretend that this is the side of a dresser. Okay, you could say this is a drawer front, and in that case, then have your grain pattern all going the same way. You can do one big, like it's one big piece of veneer, or one, board of oak, and that's fine. Or you can chop it up into smaller pieces and make it look a little more authentic. The smaller the wood planks that you do, the easier it is to fool the eye. So for this, we're going to cut it up into 3 boards. And we're just taping it off so that we can overlap without having to worry. Applying the glaze, we want to use a synthetic brush, just like when we do the one-step paint. So we're only going to work on a section at a time. So for this board, and make sure you have your inspiration sheet right next to you and you know what you're going to do ahead of time, because you have to work quickly with the glaze. We do have more time than if we were just painting on the paint, but it's not that much time to where we can kind of sit around and play with it. If you don't like the design, if for some reason you do it and it just looks horrible, don't panic. Even if it starts drying, as long as it hasn't fully dried, you can go back with your brush with more glaze. That will reactivate the glaze that has not fully dried, and you can start over. So you're not stuck on, whatever you end up with first. So we're just going to do a little bit at a time. Never do the whole piece at once. We just want to do sections. So once you have your glaze on there, we're going to do what's called stretching the glaze out, and we're going to thin it out. And the reason that we do that is because if I were to start trying to manipulate the glaze right now, it's going to puddle up on me, and it's not going to look very nice when I try to move it around and add some detail to it. So because we want to make it look like actual grain, I use the chip brushes, and this is just the 2.5-inch chip brush. And all we're doing is we're just kind of pulling our brush through the glaze, like so. If they're a little wiggly, that's okay. There are no straight lines in nature. And once that is stretched out and looks good, this is when we have to kind of work quickly and know what we're doing. So I'm going to take my eraser. I'm going to do part of the heart grain. I'm going to kind of make it maybe not center, but a little bit off center. And I just use the beveled edge of the eraser and just kind of make not quite a perfect circle. And then we'll take our graining tool. We'll just kind of start at the top goes down, kind of moves around the hard grain and back down. And then let's say we want to use one of the smaller. And that kind of follows. And if you look at wood, it has some movement, but then it goes straight again. So it always goes around the hard grain and then it goes straight again. And the grain lines nearest to the hard grain are always going to be wider than when they start going out. So once that's done and you have your grain pattern, take the small grain teeth and just kind of pull it straight through. Don't worry about following the hard grain. These are just kind of the graining that you see in the background and kind of breaks up these lines for us. And now before it fully is dry, we're going to take another one of our chip brushes, just a dry chip brush, and we're just going to kind of whisk it, just like you were to have, let's say, pencil shavings on your table or breadcrumbs, and you just kind of whisk it into your hand. See how that kind of moves it and makes it look like the grain in the wood? So with our synthetic brush, okay. So I'll show you with the steel wool. All right, we're just going to press it against the surface, edge right here. We'll just kind of pull it through. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Grains can be a little wavy, just like so. Perfect. And then we will take our other chip brush for whisking. Make sure it's nice, dry, fluffy. Just going to kind of whisk. See how it kind of whiskers all of those lines to make it look just like wood grain. I mean, that's starting to look like wood already, especially this side. After we do the overglaze and the toning, it's going to blow your mind. Okay, so we want to make our middle V. So when the hard grain, it kind of is it's an inverted V, and the apex isn't always a point. Sometimes it has what they call the mountains, and it kind of does this little squiggle at the end. So I'll show you what I mean. So we could take the eraser tool. You can also take a dry synthetic sponge, the 90-degree angle tip on that works too. So if we start here and we just kind of do the hatching motions. Hatching motions, I mean, you know, we're not dragging it, we're kind of hatching it up so that the line is not straight. And then go to the other side and it kind of goes straight and then it curves a little bit. And maybe it comes back down like this. Like so. See how that goes? And then what we'll do is we'll do another one inside. It kind of just follows the one you made. Sponge is a really great tool to do for this. So once you have a couple lines, remember to go back with your brush and just kind of whisk it up, because we want those to look like real grain. Okay, so then we could switch it to like the eraser tool, right? And we just kind of hatch motion up, and we're erasing, using it as a negative tool down. You can see it's drying on me. So just do sections at a time, of course. And then we just kind of whisk those lines up. See that? And normally, if you were doing this, I would say to flip it around, but you could do it if you needed to, if your piece doesn't allow that, to do it upside down. So now we're using our sponge, right? The same thing We're creating our V. And maybe we'll just kind of go a little bit smaller this time. Oops. If you mess up, like I did there, you can let it be. All these little happy mistakes make it look more authentic anyways, because wood grain is never perfect. As long as your lines go to the edge, you're good. And then now we're going to take our chip brush and just kind of whisk it up. See how it kind of goes up like this towards the heart? Perfect. So we have our glaze here, and we're just going to dip our toothbrush, or you can use your old chip brush to do fly specking. And I'll show you. The toothbrush kind of leaves smaller splatters, I feel like, a finer mist of splatters, versus the chip brush kind of does a lot of larger ones in a nice mix. So just load up the tip of your brush, and we're just going to come just above the surface. We're just going to pull back on the bristles. See that? Now we don't want to have a lot of fine, so this is perfect. So once you have a splatter done, you're going to take your brush and you're just going to whisk it. See that? Just whisk it up. And we're just kind of like dragging that upwards to create those nice little grain lines. And just like with the toothbrush, right, you just run your finger to kind of splatter. Come closer, sometimes farther, just kind of mix it up because we want it to be very random. Take our brush, and we're just whisking, whisk. Remember, just like if you were to brush crumbs, whisk it down, whisk it up. Perfect. All right, so we're back on, we have allowed all of our glaze layers to dry. I let mine dry overnight, but as long as it's the minimum of 45 minutes, then you're okay to move on to the next step. And that's why we're doing the overglazing, which is kind of going to bring it all together. And to do this, we're going to use to be 1 part Java to 4 parts Dearborn, okay? And that will give us a lighter color to go over. Now we do want this one to be a little more translucent, so we'll do the 1 part glaze to the paint, but then also do about 1.5 parts water. Not quite 2 parts, but about in between there. You want it to look a little more runny. We want it just to be a tiny bit more translucent, but not completely translucent. It is still going to be opaque, and that will give us our perfect color to go over. So once that's all nice and mixed up and ready to go, then we are going to take our nylon brush, and we're just going to brush it on sections at a time, whatever you can work. Make sure to cover the entire area lengthwise, because that's the way we're going to be pulling our brush. Or if you're doing the graining horizontally, then of course that's the way you would pull your brushes horizontally. So you want to follow the grain line, obviously. So just sections at a time that you can work on. And now we are going to take our chip brush. So instead of using the softer kind of chip brush, you could even use a smaller one like the 2-inch or 1.5 inch. So a little more rough on the rougher side, you know, little mangled chip brush here like you would use for dry brushing. And we're just going to drag that through. Don't worry if your lines are not perfectly straight. Just like so. And once that looks good to you, you start seeing the background coming through, then we're going to do what's called flogging, and that's going to create those pores that you see on oak finishes. To do the flogging, you can use any brush that's springy. So the Maker Studio wedge brush is perfect for this. Mine just happens to be wet and is drying. You want to make sure that it's dry and it's nice and fluffy. That's the key, but any brush will do. So whether it's one of these big, synthetic nylon brushes, you see how it moves and it springs back when I move my wrist, or like a really cheap polyester brush. I think these are like $2 or something. As long as it has some movement, doesn't matter what it looks like. And just like before, we're hitting the heel of the brush onto the surface. At the same time, we're moving up with it, right? And we're kind of overlapping each one. And it's not as hard as it sounds. So watch how I do this. We're just hitting it and moving it up at the same time. And this creates those pores. Make sure to flip your brush so you don't redeposit the glaze. And I'm not hitting it gently. I'm kind of bouncing it on the surface as I go and just hitting the heel. You see how the paint's coming up right there? Now you could go over it again. Perfect. See if the So now, before this section dries, we're going to overlap. We're going to do it again and move on to the next section. Make sure you overlap just a tiny bit on that wet edge so that you don't have any lap marks. So mix it up. Make sure to remix your glaze. Slightly overlapping the first one. We take our chip brush again. We just drag it through. See those lines that it's making? So let's say you use one of these, cheap polyester. Make sure it's cheap, because the cheaper they are, I feel like the more springy they are. We're just going to hit the brush while we move up, just like so. And then we're going to flip our brush. And when you're doing this, you're going to want to do what's called a drummer hold. So like you would hold a drumstick, same way you would hold the brush when you're doing the flogging or creating the pores. Looking awesome. Once that's dry, we're going to finish it off with our toning. Now that we've had a chance for all of our glaze layers to dry, now we're going to do what's called the toning. And what that is it's basically the same as shadowing or highlighting when you're painting. So to make the glaze, to add in the darker gray, I use the Winsor Gray gel stain, and it's 1 part gel stain to 1 part glazed over to 2 parts water, and that gives us this nice thin, it's definitely more watered down than we were used to on our previous glazes, but that's going to help with stippling it out. And when I say stippling it out, what I mean is when you take your brush, let's say you use the chip brush, and I would do maybe the fluffiest one that you have out of your chip brushes. We want it to kind of have that square and a little bit soft, a little dense in the bristles. That'll help pixelate it or stipple it. So stippling is this. It's when we add the glaze and then we just pounce our brush literally up and down motion. And you kind of move your wrist to pounce it around. And what this does is it kind of pixelates the glaze and blends it in. You can use this chip brush for painting it on. This is the Amy Howard at Home artist brush. Any synthetic artist brush will work. And we're just gonna add some areas. So it can be completely random. Maybe we wanna add some, maybe just to the edges here. Maybe some just here and there. Now remember, only work in sections at a time because the glaze will dry fast on you, especially being watered down a little bit. Maybe we'll just add a little bit here. And plus it's good to always step back and look at it from afar to make sure that you like the way it's going too, and see if you need to add more. So we're gonna start stippling this. All you do is just pound your brush up and down. See how it just kind of blends that in? Up and down motion, turn your wrist. Now the more you sit and stipple at it, the finer the color is going to get. And then also with wood grain, you get the whisking motion. So at the end, I always just like to whisk my toned areas just to kind of give it a little bit of drag so it looks like the graining and the color changes on the wood. Perfect. So you see how this looks great right here. This kind of stands out a little bit too much. It just doesn't make sense. So what I would do then to fill that in is just kind of bring this together, kind of blend it in just a little bit more, and then maybe we'll go a little bit here. And remember, if you don't like the way it's looking, or you mess up, or maybe you just don't want it on there at all and change your mind, it's not a big deal. Just take a wet, lint-free rag, wipe it away before it has a chance to fully dry, and you're good to go. Perfect. See how that just adds a little bit more depth to it? Now you could also take some of the Dearborn and make the same watered down glaze with the Dearborn to add some highlights if you wanted to. Maybe you wanted a little bit more white inside the V grain. Of course, I wouldn't spend this kind of time on the trim of a piece, or say the base, or the feet. I would spend this kind of time and go this length on maybe the top of the piece, like the tabletop or the drawer fronts of your dresser, something that's going to stand out and have a little bit more design element to it. That's where I would do the toning. All right. So now that we are done and the finish is on, I actually did two examples here because you can go both ways. I did one side with the matte sealer. It does have a tiny bit of a sheen to it, but it's definitely more matte than you would find like on a poly or a gloss finish. Or you can always top it with wax. My Neural Beeswax is the least amount of sheen and it dries clear. So this will probably be the better choice if you wanted to go wax. But if you wanted to add a little bit more warmth, I recommend the light antiquing wax. Or if, let's say, you want a little bit more white, you want it to look a little more whitewashed, add the cerusine wax. What's great about this is if you decide to do the matte sealer and then change your mind later and want to add that decorative wax, you absolutely can. You can always put wax over matte sealer, but never the other way around. Wax is always the last step because anything you put on after, it will completely reject it and it won't adhere. So just remember that. On here, this side is done with the wax, this side is done with the matte sealer. Either one is a great choice. I would recommend, though, sealing the piece. And we always want to protect our decorative finish that we work so hard on. So that is the finish. I was going to show you how to apply it, but you know what? Amy has some amazing videos already on YouTube on her channel that shows you the difference in wax and matte sealer and how to apply it. And I highly recommend those if you want to see the best way to get this on your surface. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you love this video, please give me some hearts. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment box below. You can find more of my tutorials and more of my sample pieces at my Facebook page or my Instagram page at rrbydesign, or visit my website, rrbydesign.com. Thank you so much for watching.